What if every experience, every hardship, every obstacle was given to you, not to break you, but to mold you and strengthen you? What if the center of your suffering was actually the key to ultimate health? And what if your own pain was meant to be the catalyst for your greatest purpose? Welcome to Buddha Belly Life, empowering purpose, mind to microbiome. Welcome to the Buddha Belly Life podcast. I am Coach Britt, and we are so excited to finally be joined today by Dr. Linda Alvarez. She is a medical doctor and MBA holder with over 10 years of experience, including roles in national, regional advocacy, and nonprofit work. Thank you, Dr. Linda, for being here through many tech issues, through all kinds of rescheduling, through different things on our end. I am so excited. You're going to be an epic series to have on here with all the fun things you have to share because of what it's taken for us to be here. You are also my most patient interviewee.
Oh my goodness. It is my pleasure to be here. I am so excited to be on the podcast and that we're doing it and that it's happening. I feel the same way. This is going to be the best podcast because of everything that happened before.
And we are really recording now. We just did some great information for about 9 minutes that was not being recorded. So we are going to get into Dr. Linda's incredible story of medical training. And the pivot she made, as well as the interesting and totally unique sabbatical she took in the middle of her medical training. So Dr. Linda, tell us about this story.
Yeah. So I think you really encapsulated it well, because when I start to tell people about my story and, my medical journey, my career path, it's definitely not linear.
Nothing is, right?
Oh, never is. All of the good stuff isn't linear, but I feel so rewarded and so empowered because I made those pivots through my clinical training and just feel kind of any task that I go on to next, I'm prepared for. And so in my medical training, I think the first time that I actually went along that different path was in medical school. As you mentioned, I took a sabbatical. So I decided in between my second and third year to take a year off to study yoga, nutrition, and Ayurveda, which is traditional Indian medicine. And I wanted to do that because as I was going through the first 2 years of medical school, we call those your basic sciences. You kind of get all of that book work really done. So you go into detail in biochem and in pharmacology. And what I was noticing was that the cause of disease and pathology and a lot of the treatment mechanisms for these pathologies was nutrition and having an understanding of nutrition. And I was frustrated as a medical student that there wasn't an emphasis on nutrition the same way as it was with the other science courses. And, nutrition was looked at much more of as like an elective or like kind of that class that you could take a breather in, when it really is such
like PE.
Right. And I'm like, no, this is the stuff that I want to learn about. This is like the nuts and bolts of like how the human body like functions and what we do and how we convert energy. And it wasn't about that. And so I just felt dissatisfied. And I couldn't, when I was interacting with patients as an early medical student, I was able to explain their diseases. I was able to explain the medication. And then when they would ask me, well, what does that mean with what I eat? I was like, oh, you're diabetic, low sugar. And I couldn't get past, I couldn't give more details. Or somebody had kidney disease and I couldn't, say something outside of fluid restrictions and a low sodium diet. And that didn't sit well with me before I was going on to my clinical work. And so, I put my foot down and I was like, I am going to take a year sabbatical, despite some of my lovely advisors who I still care about saying that you shouldn't do that. But I did it. And it was such an amazing, rewarding year. It made me so much more ready to work with patients and have an understanding of how we could make lifestyle modifications and nutrition changes for healthier outcomes. And so, I mean, I loved it, and it still influences me to this day, but yeah, it was not conventional.
Well, and kudos to you for following your soul on that and not following, authority it can be so intimidating to have people that are leaders or mentors in our life who give us, recommendation to say, hey, I feel called in this direction and this is what I need to do. I mean, the greatest successes that most people make, I feel like they have stories like that where I had to walk it alone. It reminds me of childbirth. I had all my kids. I had all natural home births with all three of my kids.
Oh my goodness. You're a superwoman.
Well, it was intense, but it's like you can have all the support in the world, but when it comes down to it, it is just you, your baby, and God, or whatever spiritual presence you feel. And you got to walk that alone. And but when you're done, you emerge just this powerhouse because you realize like you needed to go through that whole experience and like emerge, and as this person and all this strength. And you did that,
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, and to that point too, you start out kind of going at it alone. Actually, when I decided to do that pivot, I was recorded as like one of the first medical students in the country to ever do it during medical school. People are like, you don't want to wait till after? And I was like, no, this is the time. I'm learning. But you actually end up finding those people who believe in what you are doing and believe in you, and really kind of help mold, how you should be approaching things, how to do things, with a mindset that allows you to incorporate what you're going to find to be useful. How do you apply it? And grow within that capacity. And so I found my mentors that I still am very, very close with to this day through that year and through that process, because, they weren't afraid to say that they support me or that they weren't sure of this journey I was going on, but they had my back, and that was the best.
And they supported you and your individualism. It's like telling someone they're self-employed and then, reprimanding them for what they do with that business. It's a doctor is going through this intense. I mean, you guys have to be so smart and so academically able to get to where you are. You deserve the recognition and the freedom a little bit of thought, especially since they call, medicine a practice. That there is no, it's not like every doctor thinks the exact same. It's good they don't. My grandma, this is a crazy story.
Ooh, I'm ready for it.
Oh, yes. So my grandma, she's passed away now, but she had cancer. She had a type of leukemia, a weird type of leukemia, and she beat it. And she was a smoker for years too, right? And that didn't take her out necessarily, directly. And then she had this rougher type of leukemia, went through some chemo and things like that. Ended up, that didn't take her out initially either. And so it was really cool. But she then, after, all the treatments and things, and she wasn't like a holistic person. The restorative piece wasn't, all that. Mm-hmm. She went traditional the whole way. But then she ended up dealing with weird, vasculitis, autoimmune, kind of neuropathy kind of stuff. And she had this strange gangrene type infection thing in her leg so badly that they scheduled her for amputation. And they said, we've got to amputate. Now, this is just a story. This is not medical recommendation. I'm just saying that, but I'm telling a story because it's an important story to tell. And so after all this stuff, they tried all these things to get rid of it, antibiotics and et cetera, and it didn't work. And it was getting into the bone, or they're afraid or something like that. It was pretty severe. So they scheduled her for amputation. And it was, I think, my aunt or somebody that said the day or so, right before she was scheduled for amputation, they said, no, we're going to take her to get a second opinion. So they go to a second doctor, and they said, don't amputate right now. And they actually told her to put mayonnaise on it, on her wound. And I still don't exactly know what that's about. And sure enough, it did it. And she never had her leg cut off. She didn't pass away until a couple years ago. Because, then by then cancer came back, went to her lungs and all over. But she was just inches away from having her leg cut off. And the point being was that it's a practice, second opinions. It's like, we still need to empower our own research,
Yeah. No, I mean, it's so different too. I mean, that's why I loved my residency, for example, because I had two different types of physicians that I was learning from, particularly for that reason, for that practice, that I wanted that scope of understanding. So I had one, attending who was we called him PubMed, which is a journal search engine that we use, because he could literally just tell you, if you were to make a point about something, he'd be like, oh, well, that was just published in the New England Journal of Medicine, this, and this, and they found this. And he could cite back articles from decades ago. And then we had another physician who I called kind of, would practice more so, I felt like cowboy medicine. He had to, he was actually trained in different third world countries. That's where he did his residency and his training. And he had to have a understanding of the fundamentals of medicine because there were such limited resources where he was treating. And he had to figure out, okay, if we don't have access to this, how do we do this, and this? It was incredible. And so to be able to work with the both of them, I was like, oh, I can take, this knowledge from both parties and really develop a full kind of understanding of care. And so to your point, like it's so much so a practice. And, even though I'm not practicing clinical medicine right now, I'm still always reading and constantly looking up journal articles, reviewing the current guidelines that are released. Because it's kind of who we are as doctors. We're very inquisitive, and that's what makes great scientists too, is that you're always seeking out more knowledge.
Do you have a desire for fulfillment? Does helping people tap into their own health mentally, emotionally, and physically fire you up? Do you believe in the impact of the gut microbiome on overall wellness? You may be an HWCA coach. For more info on our cutting-edge health coach trainings, visit hwcacoach.com.
So your journey took you through, just a brief, because we're going to touch more on your now stuff in a little later, but your journey took you through medical school with a hiatus for a sabbatical, which I would argue was hardly a sabbatical. It was a sabbatical I would say it's a sabbatical for sure. But I'd say it was hardly a hiatus from medical training. I say that you were definitely strengthening your knowledge, your viewpoints, the clarity and perspective you were able to have, and prevention and all of that immensely by doing that. And I wish more doctors would do what you did. I think it would be just a blessing to all of us. But so you did that, and then obviously you came back and you finished medical school. And what did that process look like of you finishing, practicing, and then advancing and deciding to again pivot?
Yeah. So I went back. I finished my third and fourth year of medical school. It was funny. I had people it was like 3 camps. There was one camp that was super excited for what I did and was like, oh, can you implement this with the patients that we're going to see? There was another camp that was like, that's ridiculous. I've had people who I've told I've done that, and they've like spit their coffee out on me, like as they were laughing. And then there is this third camp too that thinks of it, almost as like, oh, this is cool, but not my thing. And so I used my third and fourth year really as an opportunity to implement what I learned. During that time too, I knew that I wanted to go into family medicine. And so I went and did my family medicine residency. I did family medicine too, because I thought I was going to go into sports medicine and sports management. And then a lot of my patients were actually very chronic illnesses, terminally ill. I ended up having a lot of the patients that had multiple uncontrolled diagnoses of chronic illnesses because I could manage it. And with that too, I had a lot of patients that then became palliative or hospice. And so kind of my care would go from either trying to help them get over these diseases and live a longer life, or if the disease progressed, we would transition into palliative and hospice care. And so I use that as, that's where I got a lot of reward in my training. And so I went and I did a fellowship in hospice and palliative care. And while I was working in a very large public hospital, working with underserved patients. And I also noticed that the physicians really weren't getting quality treatment or care. We were working over 80 hours a week with limited access to food, or even on call rooms when we were working overnight. And so I got very active in my labor union as a physician, and then became the vice president of the labor union for physicians in Florida, and then the national executive secretary treasurer. And I actually left clinical medicine to do that full time. And so I was organizing other resident physicians how to form their own unions, as well as helping nurses and physicians pass legislation and real types of political change that would positively impact our patients. So I did that, during the COVID pandemic, up until the end of 2020. We were overseeing over 60 hospitals, 10 different states, over 20,000 doctors during the pandemic. And it was a political job at the same time. And so as much as I love politics, I was like, I'm going to step back. And I also wasn't, practicing anymore. And I was like, this, although I support this fight, this isn't my fight, and I should be passing the torch. And I was holding that position while getting my MBA, and that kind of led me to my current, calling and job and real passion, which is Level, a sports nutrition company dedicated to female athletes. And so that's what I'm working on now. But it's, again, not linear, kind of hard to follow, but super rewarding through that whole journey.
Thank you for joining us for another empowering episode of Buddha Belly Life. For more information on gut health and mindset resources, visit buddhabellylife.com. And remember, heal yourself and then empower others to do the same.